Sadly though,
here come the tractors.
British tractor manufacturing business
prolific tractor manufacturer and exporter just after the war, or in the post-war years. Sadly not that today. Lots of clubs, they're here.
We still have New Holland, who are working out of the
I think it's called Tom
Ford, and
here, the commentator, Tom Collymore or something like that. Gloucestershire man doing the commentary here, Tom, all coming in here.
And then export them. That's
Yeah,
quite a big
most of them
business.
just assembled here, assembly lines. I think it's only
sadly, all the
New Holland was Ford,
such as Ferguson, Fordson,
coming in the ring here.
Leyland and Nuffield are no more. The factories have either been closed down or completely
sadly
flattened, such as the Banner Lane factory up in Coventry. 3.3 million tractors
coming in here.
There, and if you go up there now, you wouldn't really know there'd been a factory there at all. So it's therefore very important, I think, to celebrate
South Cerney
and commemorate the achievements of these tractor manufacturers. But it was Harry Ferguson, the diminutive Northern Irishman, who really reinvented the tractor and turned it into one integrated unit with its
3-point linkage,
unique set of equipment, the Ferguson System. And he did that with a 3-point linkage and a hydraulic lift, and the tractor controlled the working depth of the implement as well as, of course, the draft forces on the tractor's rear axle. And with the weight suspended on the back of the tractor, of course, that gave extra grip as well. And of course, with the Ferguson tractor, you could actually cultivate right up into the corners of the field.
very practical.
Before the Second World War, though, you didn't see too many tractors, it must be said, in the British farmland. The horse still.
The margin of the horses in the 50s, sadly.
It was the Second World War where you really saw the push for mechanisation. Unfortunately, we had the Model N Fordson, which was a really old crude type of tractor. It was very basic, but it was cheap to build, and the factory at Dagenham was already in place. And we managed to build 137,000 of those at Dagenham during the 5 years of the wartime, and it did 90%
still working there around here
of the ploughing during the Second World War.
Hopefully see them all.
There were other manufacturers around at the time, such as David Brown and Marshalls, but we also had a lot of tractors coming over from America as part of the Lend-Lease arrangement between the US government and our own government, and that provided not only arms and
as I mentioned earlier,
but farm tractors as well. But in the period after the war, that is when we really saw the uptake of mechanisation, and a lot of tractor manufacturing started up in the post-war period, and we'll be seeing a lot of the tractors that hail from those times. Well, the tractors are parading across, and this is a really good way of seeing them in action, motoring from side to side. And when they come past me, I will obviously try my best to describe them in a concise and informative way. All of these tractors remind me of my life, growing up on a small tenant dairy farm in the north of the county, when the small to medium-sized family farm predominated. There did seem to be a share of the farming cake in those days for everybody who wanted to farm. Providing you ran your business half decently, there was always a profit to be made. How times have changed. In the valley where I grew up, there were dairy farms everywhere. In fact, every farm had a herd of cows. There's not one left now, just ghost farms with buildings and no livestock.
House building as well all over the place.
The market would have ever shut. What a hive of activity that was on Mondays and Thursdays. When I think of some of the great tractor dealerships that we've lost, such as West Midland Farmers, who had branches all over the county, along with F.H. Burgess, to name another one. So much change, but of course there was a lot of change when the first tractors came on, and of course a lot of the agricultural jobs were done away with the advent of the tractor, but they were broadly replaced by people getting involved in tractor manufacturing and also working for dealerships. And many farmers' sons actually gave up farming and went to agricultural and engineering college to learn to become a tractor mechanic and a fitter. So it is like turning back the clock for me, because it stirs up memories of my childhood on a 130-acre farm at Alderton.
Well, that's a big farm there, huh?
County.
Back in those days.
Of course, a lot of the county council farms now have been sold off, and they provided a great opportunity for a lot of farmers who weren't born with a silver spoon in their mouth.
They weren't handed down.
It gave them a stake in farming. It all started in the 1920s, just after the First World War, with the Lloyd George Homes Fit for Heroes schemes. But about a quarter of the estate now has been sold off, including our former farm, Windmill Farm, in the north of the county.
Massey Harris there, the Leyland.
This is the man who does all the booking in. Let's have a round of applause for Mr. Phil Townsend. What a hero, and along with Sarah Keats, they do all the admin. The 35X, driven by his son. This is the all-singing, all-dancing version.
Country over there, not in sync with my photographs here, because I'm not over there. See the tractors going round, working the way down the ring.
And that was available from 1961 onwards, and some would say the ultimate version of a Ferguson tractor. About 44 horsepower with the Perkins P3 based engine. Another Hartall tractor now, and John Deere. This is a 6400 made from the mid-90s onwards, and you can see how tractors have evolved from that Ford 5000 that Neil was driving. This one's got a 4-cylinder engine, it's got 4-wheel drive, a quiet cab, air conditioning, no vibration, and higher power on the hydraulics too, so that tractor can work with a lot bigger equipment. The 342 now, driven by Nigel Newman. This particular tractor is used extensively, not only at rally fields, but during the ploughing season, as Nigel's a keen amateur ploughman, and he's also got a B47 International baler which he uses to power that. Those tractors were made by Morris Motors, and they started making tractors from the late 1940s onwards. The Model N Ford
Morris Motors, there you are.
That's the Spitfire and the Hurricane. That's a mid-war version with the economy mudguards and the smaller toolbox.
Lamborghini here.
Made from about 1943 onwards with the reduced
Italian
toolwork.
tractor, of course.
A nice Massey Harris now, and this particular tractor was a result of the collaboration with the Wallace Company, which Massey Harris purchased in the 1930s with the U-shaped underframe. And Massey Harris were the company which went into bed with Ferguson and eventually amalgamated to produce Massey Ferguson, and renowned for their combines and their harvesting equipment. The third stage version of the 154 Leyland mini tractor. The first one was the BMC Mini.
Massive TW25 here.
The Leyland tractors came out in 1969 with a new colour scheme, and these were made at Bathgate in Scotland. And in production for a good 10 years. If it had received the development that it undoubtedly deserved, it could have been even better. But it was starved of funding because it was part of British Leyland. Hello Jim, how are you sir? You're going to join me
Sad
today.
cutbacks over the years.
Thompson's a bit of rest. Wax lyrical about the farm all there.
Well, Farm All 8 is an interesting one. The driver sits to one side, so as he drives along, the engine's to one side, so you can look at implements mounted between the wheels, and that is a useful thing of that.
Known as Cultivision.
Yeah, precisely.
A lot of those came over under the lease lend arrangement, so a nice little lightweight row crop tractor, a lot easier to handle than the standard Fordson. Interesting commercial here, Jim.
Yeah, well, of course that's what became the 135 eventually by a roundabout route. But at that time, Perkins were doing them as a conversion to the original Continental and the standard engine. Instead of a paraffin, they were running on diesel.
Now, an Alice Chalmers tractor now, and this is a World War II tractor because it's got the bowed axle at the front. And nice to see a Land Army girl. My word, hasn't she worn well, Jim?
I know, yeah. He's obviously kept her in good storage.
One of the higher horsepower international tractors made at Doncaster, and International were a prolific manufacturer of agricultural tractors and machinery in the 20th century. They opened the Doncaster factory in about 1949, and they made tractors there for a good 40 years. 55 horsepower and a good lugging tractor, that is, for pulling a 3-furrow plough.
Well, it certainly is. And if you want a Fortune Major, the thing about Fortune Major, they're a tractor that always starts, and that's a big step forward in the winter.
Driven by Mike Legg, one of the most distinguished drivers of Morton C. Cullimore lorries in the whole county. I thought I'd throw that in.
Oh yeah, you do these things. Another international diesel now. And of course that engine was a very good lugging engine. It lasted a long time, but why not? It did the job.
Used in the crawlers as well, that engine, so very, very torquey.
Yeah.
That's a P3 version of the Alice 270, and Alice Chalmers went to Frank Perkins and said, can we have another engine transplant, because they couldn't really
International
develop a diesel themselves. So that's really a reworked version of the famous Model B, and nice to see the tip cart as well. Nice little bit of nice combination there.
Yeah, originally a horse-drawn, I should imagine, and then converted like so many of them.
That's it.
And then once they got tractors on, they soon wrecked her.
She's all yours.
Well,
Okay.
I was going to say you're the 414.
Okay. The 414 was launched in 1961 as the revert version of the 275, but the 275 carried on in production until 1968. It was a very popular tractor, 40 horsepower, and that's got variable draft flow hydraulics on it. So even International were getting in on the sophisticated hydraulics of the time. And I like those because they're delightfully styled. They were in production from 1961 until 66 and made at the old Jowett car factory near Bradford.
Another make there from yesteryear. Jowett cars.
You always think of them as sports cars, and they were making tractors long before they made sports cars. Not many of them sold in this country when new. Probably their most famous customer, I think, is what's his name? Clarkson, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. He had to have a Lamborghini, didn't he?
Oh, of course, yeah.
And that's about 105 horsepower, and they were launched in 1977, and the production run was for about 5 years. And they sold their tractor division actually to Seat, a Italian company who also made tractors. That's one of the later
Spanish.
Fords, and this was the era when they were just about to sell their tractor division to New Holland, the division of Fiat. So the TW25 was about 150 horsepower, and it's got front-mounted linkage so that you could power something on the front as well on the back as well. The 2000 was a basic range tractor, launched in 1964. That's the revised version. That's the 7600, early 1980s tractor, turbocharged engine, producing just over 100 horsepower and building on the success of the Ford 7000. She's all yours, Jim.
Nice 35 now. And of course, later on, the 35 actually got the descendant of the P3 engine. So after a time, Massey Ferguson bought the company. So it was there. They got there in the end. It took a bit of time after the first P3 conversion before they bought the company. So it was a good demonstration.
The 135, well, these were launched in 1964 as the reworked version of the 35X, about 45 horsepower, and part of Massey Ferguson's worldwide range of tractors. So they had a common range of tractors built at several factories throughout the world to keep production costs down.
Now this is an interesting one. This is the Leyland. Leyland, of course, was a descendant of the Nuffield, and the first Leyland tractors were virtually Nuffields repainted, and then they got their own thing. And the first thing that they did was a synchromesh gearbox. Useful tractor, that.
Synchromesh, there we are. Not easy to change gear and keep moving.
Until the mid-1950s, a horizontal one-cylinder tractor engine, a 6.5-inch bore and a 9-inch stroke, a 2-stroke diesel, fantastic lugging power, and a very simple tractor to work on. Only 66 moving parts on that, so you could do a lot of the repairs on the farm, and commonly fitted with a winch.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is an interesting one. It's a Nuffield, but it's only got the three-wheeled layout. More common in the eastern counties, for road crop work in particular. But you could actually change it from three-wheel to four-wheel layout.
Case club there.
Easily.
All the tractor clubs are here.
Original starting end
Ford,
was this one,
Marshall,
there we
Leyland,
go. was to one side.
And a few others there with a case
That's
there as well, of
fitted
course.
with the Morris commercial engine, so it was quite a powerful engine for its time, about 38 horsepower. But no, there's no hydraulics fitted on that tractor. This was the era when people were still buying tractors just to pull the existing equipment they had, because of course if you bought a hydraulically fitted tractor you had to buy the equipment as well.
Precisely, this is it. And that was probably used, as I say, for road crop work and not used.
Here comes the Massey Harris here.
Yes, well this was the replacement tractor
744
for the
diesel.
what we saw earlier on, the 414. So these were launched in about 1966 with a little bit more horsepower, easier servicing on them as well, restyling, and note the basic cab fitted to that tractor, so there was no soundproofing on that. It just basically kept the rain off the driver, but the downside was, of course, it didn't have any soundproofing, so it did damage your hearing because it amplified the engine and the gearbox noise. So it did also offer some protection if the tractor tipped over.
Don't forget the cab also kept the
David Brown.
the driver if he turned it over, so it was quite useful thing. And this is the 444, this is a later variant of the International.
Another David Brown.
But basically the same tractor underneath.
And the Badford factory was in existence up until the early 1980s, and they actually made skid units for Mani 2 as well there, but then that factory closed down and International concentrated on Doncaster and their other factories. Well, a nice Massey Harris 101.
Important at the bench.
Got the twin power facility, so it had a two-speed governor on this engine
German.
to give separate sort of power settings for belt pulley drive work and what have you.
Back to
Massey
the
Harris
British
were a prolific
Massey
manufacturer
Ferguson
of
here, the
combines
135.
and reaping equipment, and then they started producing tractors. They acquired the Wallace company, which helped them along a bit. You can see some of the lineage of the Wallace tractor in this one. And this is a road crop design, so it had a high ground clearance, and the road crop tractors really were inspired by the Farmall tractors,
The
which were made by
135.
International Harvester. So all the other tractor manufacturers built their high ground clearance tractors so that they could straddle the crop and set the wheels according to what they were actually working amongst. And Massey Harris amalgamated with Ferguson after the Second World War, so they were producing tractors here just after the
35.
Second World War, and then they went into
predecessor there.
Ferguson, and the rest, as they say, is history. No hydraulics, just a power takeoff shaft on that one.
Of course, on the that Massey Harris, the Massey Harris gave rise to the Nuffield in a way, because that was an important saver they built. Far more end now. This is
made from 1938
T20.
onwards, and building on the success of the 1220 Marshall. Some of these were made during the Second World War, but Marshalls were making midget submarines and marine guns as well as part of their war work at the time. So basically this is the forerunner to the Field Marshal, which came out in 1945, and some of the first Field Marshals actually had some of the wheels left over from the Model N's production run. And that single cylinder engine was in production for 22 years on Marshall's tractors, but by the late 50s, of course, it run its course really, and that's when they decided to go for multi-cylinder engines.
Now you notice you've got a winch on there, and that of course very popular with thrashing contractors, because the Marshall
John Deere, the American make for
were a one-man team. So before it had one man stoking on the steam engine and one man on the thrashing drum. So that was progress in this day.
Yeah. Another nicely restored Field Marshal now. There were several series of these. By the 50s they got the Series 3 out. It had a dual range gearbox. They managed to get a bit of extra horsepower out of the engine, and they also made a crawler version of these as well. And they even tried fitting hydraulics on them and self-starters. But as I say, by the 50s, most people were looking towards multi-cylinder engines because they offered a little bit better performance. But there's nothing wrong with the Field Marshal concept. It was a very reliable engine and great lugging power.
We started off with manufacturing Ferguson tractors, the David Brown Ferguson. And then David Brown had an idea as to what was needed in a bigger tractor, and that's eventually developed into the Cropmaster. And Harry Ferguson went off to America and powered up with Henry Ford, with the Ford Ferguson, and eventually Ford and and Massey and David Brown were very much bitter competitors.
60,000 of those crop masters were sold in 5 years, so they were David Brown's really big first successful tractor, and painted in that colour, hunting pink, because David Brown was a keen huntsman, so he chose that colour because it matched his riding jacket. Nice Oliver road crop now. This is an 88 with a high ground clearance, a 6-cylinder engine, a Walkershire 6-cylinder engine, and designed for prairie farming, a 6-cylinder engine designed to run on high octane fuel. And the seat is interesting because it's got a degree of
International Harvester here, an American model there.
Seat that is, so that would give the driver a bit more cushioning when he was going over rough ground. They were in production.
Supply commentary here, of course.
Up into the early 1950s, and Oliver, another great tractor manufacturer,
35
who are no longer in existence. Quite a number came over in the Second World War as part of the Lend-Lease range of tractors, and their common ploughing tractors were based on car designs. They were more lower revving hauling tractors, but that one was actually designed especially by Oliver.
Yeah, and how? What a useful tractor too. If you got one of those, you felt you were doing well. D270, another one out of Chalmers, and again that instead of the petrol engine, they've got the Perkins P3 on there, but now they've got a form of hydraulic linkage as well. Not full linkage, but a bit of direct linkage anyway. And one of the first
Forcing power major here.
Out of Chalmers was they were used with the rotorblader, and that was a weird machine. First machine produced around Bales.
That particular model was made in a factory in Lincolnshire, in Essendine, but the original assembly point for Alice Chalmers was down near Southampton, and they had a production facility in this country to the late 1960s building tractors, so it was quite a short-lived thing really.
Yeah, they actually had a short-lived thing in a mental hospital up in Wiltshire, in Worcestershire. I think probably because Southampton was getting bombed. 344 Leyland there.
This was the mid-power range tractor, the 154. The 344 was based upon the old Nuffield Universal engine, about 55 horsepower, and built at the Bathgate factory, which had been set up by the government in the mid-1960s to re-employ redundant Scottish miners. Nice to see the ladies on the tractors, a reminder of the sterling work done by the British Land Army girls during the Second World War, and of course the efforts of many a farmer's wife helping out at the busy times of the year, doing a bit of tractor driving. To the flambeau red or flambeau orange.
Moving on here.
You'll notice by the way,
Massey
got that habit of painting their name very large on there, and that actually showed up when they showed showed photographs during the war, Land Army girls, etc. You could see what they were driving.
David Brown.
Another 744 now, and again the P6 engine.
Delay moving forward there due to the amount of tractors in the ring here. Moving slowly around here.
The North American tractor, the 44, they shipped them over and then put the P6 engine over here.
Detailed commentary here.
A 4-cylinder version of this is made as well, the 745. And a lot of tractor manufacturers went to Frank Perkins, who'd set up his engine company prior to the Second World War with Colin Chapman. And that's got a 7-bearing crankshaft on it, and if you're going to do any repairs on it, make sure you get
International
a set of
1055
spanners, because it's all Whitworth.
Lovely condition there.
Now, this is an interesting one. We were talking about Field Marshal earlier on. When the Marshal got outclassed, they designed the MP4, decided that wasn't strong enough, and they decided to build the MP6, and the engine they used was the Leyland engine. And that was a full 70 horsepower when it was made, and that was rated to be too big a tractor for this country. There were a few marketed, but not many of them in this country.
That one was rescued by David Aylward in a completely unoperational state. It had a cracked cylinder block. He found it in some singing nettles in France. Only 197 of those were ever made, ladies and gentlemen, so that's a really, really rare tractor, and it's in better condition than it ever left the Marshall works, I'd wager. No hydraulics, so it was basically a hauling tractor. It had a power takeoff shaft as well, but it just didn't sell in the numbers like Marshall had hoped for. A white David Brown now, Jim.
Well, I think that's very modest, 40 years and still on field tech. You'll get it right one day.
His grandfather's tractor, which he rescued. It was in the orchard.
Here's the Ford 7610 here.
All over the country.
Very popular tractor today.
He's done a lot of ploughing matches with it as well. A 1944 model, so the economy mudguards, the economy toolbox. Steel was in very short supply at the time, so the economies had to be made.
But those tractors, they won the war for another case for the ploughing up. They were the ones, Dagon and Bay, the large numbers. If you got a tractor, that was normally the one they got.
Nothing on here as well.
Right. A German-built Fendt tractor now, and Fendt are still making tractors now. They are the premier brand of AGCO, who own Massey Ferguson now, and they had a long history of making tractors. They were making tractors prior to the Second World War. This is a 3-cylinder model with a downswept exhaust, and this one's probably come over through probably one of the Cambridge sales, because they weren't terrifically available to British farmers at the time. They were more of a continental market tractor. And note the seat on the mudguard for continental tractor for drivers.
That was for carrying the wife, so that you can tell him how to drive.
That's right.
135 now, and again, as I say, this is built with the...
This is a narrow one, I think, Jim, isn't it?
Yeah.
250,000 135s were made, and they actually carried on producing them beyond the 2 Series range, which was launched in 1976. There was always a customer for a 135, so they carried on making them up until 1980. And they're a tractor that always commands a high resale value at farm sales, because some would say they're the ultimate version, really, of the Ferguson concept.
I mean, you can see them side by side, the difference in width between the two.
That's it, yeah. Yeah, and fitted with a Howard rotary rotivator, power takeoff driven, and a convenient way of preparing land for sowing potatoes and things of that nature, breaking land up using rotary cultivation in 10 years. The culmination of one man's crusade to mechanised farming, the late great Harry Ferguson.
517,000 in 10 years of the T20s.
This is now for another
That's how many were made.
John Deere. John Deere.
Apparently. If the facts are right here.
It's still got the family there.
After the war.
Ian Candy at the controls, and he's done that tractor. It doesn't look much.
Canopy there like a traction engine.
Really well done.
That's a 1947 Model AR, and the A came out in 1934.
Another import here.
It was actually restyled the next year in 1948, and a very, very good seller for John Deere. They had the A and
left-hand
the
drive,
B, and they ran that alongside the D, which had been the first great success for them. Well, Jim, we were having a good old talk about this one yesterday, weren't we?
Well, it's different. Interesting
Leyland.
thing, it's actually an Avery tractor, but it was originally built as a road grader. But you'll notice the front wheel was a bit strange. They got to turn that right round, because otherwise, if it reverses, it's so self-centering that it can't reverse very far. So you've actually got to turn it through 180 degrees if you're going backwards. Very interesting machine, that 1917. That.
And Avery were another great name which sort of perished in the mid-1930s with the depression in farming, so they never really recovered from that. Well, one of International's great success stories, the International Titan.
Yeah, 1917 that model there.
Of these were made.
Just leaving the ring
of these
here.
Came over into Britain during the First World War as part of the World War I ploughing campaign. The local dealership Aubrey Rees had a few on demonstration, and they found their way out onto farms. Only about 22 horsepower, and the big tank you see on the front is a coolant tank. We've got another one of these,
That's
so we
the
can
harvester.
talk a little bit more about them a bit later on. It's nice to see a tractor in its original condition. It's a reminder of how well it's lasted. It's had a hard life, but it also shows us the amount of work that goes into restoring these tractors to a pristine condition. The Ford 3000, well, this was launched in 1964, and it had a square configuration engine, so it had an
field here,
bore
460.
size and an equal stroke size, and that was designed to give less wear on the engine.
Another 135.
47 horsepower, and a long production run for that tractor from 1964 until 1975, when it was replaced by the 3600. Nice to see one of the Gloucestershire tractor mafia here, a familiar face on many.
We thought they didn't have cabs or something, they were taken off over the years.
Freeman from Appling, but his David Brown 25. About 25,000 these were made from 1952 until 1957, and they were basically an economy version of the Copmaster, because David Brown were really facing significant competition at the time. So the fairings had gone round the driving position,
the Leyland.
The mudguards were more economy, but that had a traction control unit on it, so it transferred weight to the rear axle of the tractor, allowing it to work with bigger implements.
364.
The 4000 was always the top seller of the Ford range. It was a direct replacement for the Ferguson Major and the Ferguson Super Major. The original ones was 55 horsepower, that's 62 horsepower, a 3-cylinder engine, and oil and nurse brakes as well, which were a lot more reliable when you were working with trailers. Power Major for you, Jim?
Power Major, of course, this was the Ferguson Major. They proved themselves, and the very first Ferguson Majors were actually quite modest power. But then the Power Major, they upped the power, and they got an extremely good tractor. And for a lot of things, it's another beating. And of course, because they had the live drive, you could drive implements and you could pause on the tractor without the implement stopping, and that, if you were baling, that was a big step forward.
Another P6 conversion now, and we're doing well with these actually for this weekend, because you actually see more of these fitted to the E27N Major, because that was a really good conversion. We gave the tractor about 45 horsepower as opposed to 27 horsepower. And that engine was fitted in not only commercial vehicles but in combines as well.
The American models here.
Gloucestershire tractor now with the KFH number. I think that was supplied new by Listers, and that's Paul Robinson. And the Cropmaster was really well specified. 2-speed belt pulley drive, 2-speed power takeoff shaft, hydraulic lift and a drawbar, all thrown in, and it was weighted actually to one side to give actually extra adhesion on the depth wheel of the plough, and the bench seat of course. Another conversion here, Roadless Jim, they're an interesting company.
Well, that's right, yeah, basically they started off with an Italian company who was making front axle drives. They started on the Major. Roadless imported them, and of course Roadless had been producing weird tractors for years before that. They built the tracks of the Massey the Branson's Crawler, amongst other things. But Paul Johnson, the founder of Roadless, was a very innovative cross-country man.
Nice to see the large International. That's about 105 horsepower, a nice long stroke on that engine, and supplied by Aubrey Rees, who are a renowned international harvester dealership just up the road in Cirencester. Another high major, E27N, a Model N tractor. I'm getting mixed up now.
Getting older.
I am getting old, Jim. That looks like a
lot to remember.
A Warwickshire tractor AE. 137,000 of those were made from 1940 until 1945, available in several gear ratios, and imagine a Land Army girl climbing aboard something like that, expected to operate that. It would be banned under health and safety now, wouldn't it, Jim?
Well, that's it, and of course, if the girls got their arms broken during the tractor driving course, they got demoted into areas. The 7610 now, this is the Ford tractor. The 7000 started the fashion for turbocharging in the Ford range, and the 7660 was a development of that. Nice tractor there, and you'll notice now he's got a reasonable, comfortable safety cabin there.
And the back of that tractor, you see it's got an assister ram, so that gives the actual tractor a hydraulic system, extra power, so it can pick up even bigger implements.
That's it, and then until something breaks.
A Universal 4 now, and Nuffield started building their own diesel engines from 1954 onwards, but that looks like a Perkins to me in there, possibly. And they went to Perkins originally for their diesel engines because they couldn't actually make them at the time. They were reliant on Morris commercial designs. The original Nuffields were made at Ward End in Birmingham, and that was a factory which had been building Bren gun carriers during the Second World War, and William Morris thought it was a good thing to do to get into tractor production, and that was there for about a good 15 years before the production briefly went to Cowley and then up to Bathgate, where Nuffield and then Leyland made tractors right the way up into the early 1980s in terms of the metal, and they had all sorts of problems with porosity. That one's still fitted with the 5-speed gearbox, but by the mid-60s the 10-speed gearbox had come out with the 10 range. Multi-power, Jim, that's interesting.
Yeah, well, effectively it gave everybody another set of gears. You could select the slow speed or the faster speed. The only snag was if you were in the faster speed you hadn't got any engine braking, which was a bit frightening. People always do it the other way around. One ratio you couldn't do it, and you usually found that out halfway down the hill when you were relying on its braking.
The 35X was the ultimate version of the 35 really. Still had indirect injection. Direct injection went through with the 135, and there are versions of this tractor still being made in India now under the Tractor and Farming Equipment branding, but not with a Perkins engine. By 1959, Massey Ferguson had acquired Perkins as their own in-house engine manufacturer, but that of course didn't stop them from still supplying Fordson tractors with their engine.
Another example of the Nuffield, but sprayed as blue, so it's sold as a Leyland.
This was the replacement for the 465 Nuffield, so about 70 horsepower. This tractor engine was still unbalanced, so they were known to have quite a bit of vibration in them. It wasn't until the early to mid 70s that they put engine balancers on those engines. But that's a nice original tractor, that is. It would be a shame to paint that because every dent, every bit of rust tells a story.
This is the little Dexter, and the thing about a Dexter is he's gone there, he's got the Lamborn cab. Now Lamborn built cabs for a lot of different tractors, and basically they were put on the conversion later on to keep the operator dry, and they did the job too.
The Dexter was launched in 1958 as really the tractor to take on the likes of the 35 and the small internationals, and it was the first Fordson to have draft flow hydraulics on, Qualitrol, and then that was put on the Fordson Super Major in 1961. And for the first year of production they had 22,000 of those were sold, and that actually put Ford back into #1 in the sales because they'd really taken the hammering with the TE20. They used to call it the Grey Menace. There's the 10-speed Nuffield tractor. So this was the 10-speed version of the Universal really, and this one had twin hydraulic pumps on it because by this time hydraulics was expected to lift more and more bigger ploughs and cultivators, and that was replaced by the 465 in 1967. Another conversion here.
I think that's a little bit more powerful than the standard in there.
Many a tractor farm mechanic did a conversion, getting a 6-cylinder engine, but Ford were very reluctant. In fact, they didn't build their own 6-cylinder engine as they thought it would lessen the lifespan of the Fordson Major. A nice Minneapolis Moline now, American tractor manufacturer, a great innovatory tractor manufacturer, one of the first to have 5-speed gearboxes, even cabs on tractors. That's designed for prairie farming, so it will pull a big set of discs or a big set of cultivators or something like that. That engine's actually got 3 separate cylinder heads on it, so each cylinder head does 2 cylinders.
Which is actually a good thing for saving distortion. Another international now, far more, and again you see that high clearance, and that of course is what the Nuffield was built to replace. So you could get a British equivalent. Another Fordson for the wartime production. And of course most of these tractors would have come out originally on steel wheels, and then the pneumatic tyres were bought in the sort of late 40s to make them more useful.
And that's a Gloucestershire Warag tractor by the looks of it.
Could well be, yeah.
With the number EDG19, and they just didn't give tractors out willy-nilly, did they, Jim? You know, you had to prove that you really needed the tractor, and especially the lease lend tractors, because they were so technically advanced, so they didn't dish those out to any...
Oh no, well, they gave them to the farmers they thought could use them best.
And the contractors as well.
Yeah.
Well, another M here. About 1,000 of these were actually made, building on the success of the 1220, launched in 1938, a big single-cylinder engine, and that familiar Marshall bark on the exhaust, the pop, 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 pop noise. and a prolific manufacturer not only of tractors but steam engines. They even made the boiler for the Longbridge car plant, did Marshalls. So a great engineering company, the Britannia Works, a famous name in Lincolnshire. Another nice David Brown 880, that's the 4-cylinder version, and that was launched in 1961, and the Implomatic range were very, very popular at the time, and sold very well for David Brown. They had a good range of tractors, and that tractor plant was opened in 1939 and ran right the way up until 1988. The building's still there, the museum's there, but sadly no tractors are made there, unfortunately. Globalisation killed the Meltham factory in terms of tractor manufacturing. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's prize time. Every year we have a cup, a trophy in memory of the late great Clive Osborne. Clive was a regular sight in the tractor section and many a rally field throughout the county. A tremendous chap, tremendous character. He took on the tractor section here for this club at Kemble, built it up there, and then transferred to South Cerney, and sadly we lost Clive in 2019 in about September, and then of course we lost John Keedwell as well. They were great friends. They collaborated with the little vintage rally down at Cambridge just off the A38 every year in May. That was their great collaboration, and we lost those two great manufacturers in this country.
This is the prize.
Who wanted to convert their existing range into four-wheel drive tractors. So I'll just go, thank you Jim, it's been a pleasure working. Let's give Jim Wilkie a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. He's an absolute living legend.
Very knowledgeable on the tractor front.
Just shows what you've got the way of legends around here.
Right sir, and you are Mr.
Andy Boyle.
And are you pleased to win this trophy?
I'm absolutely gobsmacked.
Well, thank you very much for bringing this rare tractor to South Cerney. It's an absolute pleasure to see it and to talk about it. It's nice to have something a bit unusual and something really that you know, weren't too many of them made, were there? So you know, and it's been
Only
really well
of them,
restored as
that's
well.
the only one in the country.
There you go. That's all. That's all. 4 or 6, yeah, give or take a 1 or 2, yeah. So into the UK. So a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for our Commentators' Cup in memory of Mr. Clive Osborne. Thank you for coming. Please have a safe journey.
There he goes.
And from me until the next time, it's Tom Cullimore, your tractor commentator, saying KTO and BBFN, keep tractoring onwards, and bye-bye for now.